The first tremor of trouble came before dawn, a guttural roar that ripped me from sleep like a gunshot. I bolted upright, my pulse hammering as the sound clawed through the stillness of our quiet street in Cedar Hollow. It was 5:30 a.m., and beyond my bedroom window, the world was still cloaked in shadow except for the glaring yellow bulk of a bulldozer tearing into the grassy strip behind our house. For 32 years, that land had been ours, a sanctuary of green my father had bought to shield us from the encroaching sprawl of the neighborhood. Now it was being gutted. "Dad!" I yelled, my voice cracking as I stumbled down the stairs, barefoot and frantic. My father, Walter Pierce, stood at the back door in his worn flannel pajamas, his silhouette rigid against the faint glow of the porch light. His silver hair stuck out in tufts, but his hazel eyes burned with a fury I hadn't seen since Mom passed a decade ago. He clutched a mug of black coffee, the steam curling into the chilly air, and stared at the destruction unfolding before us. "What in God's name is happening?" I demanded, joining him. The cold tile bit at my feet, but the sight outside was colder. Workers in neon vests swarmed the lot, orange spray paint slashing new boundaries across the earth, some curvying suspiciously close to our backyard fence. Walter's jaw tightened. "I don't know, Nora. That's my land. Bought it cash in '92 to keep this house private. No one's got the right to touch it." He turned, limping toward the kitchen, his old war injury, flaring U-panned, snatched his phone from the counter. I followed, my stomach twisting as he dialed, his voice growing sharper with each call that went unanswered. By 7 a.m., the scene had escalated into a nightmare. A backhoe joined the bulldozer, ripping up roots and soil with mechanical indifference, while a crew pounded stakes into the ground. I grabbed my jacket and marched outside with Walter trailing behind, his cane tapping against the pavement. "Hey!" I shouted at a stocky worker in a hard hat. "What are you doing? This is private property." He barely glanced up from his clipboard. "Cedar Hollow HOA project. New community PA VY Lion. Talk to the boss if you've got a problem." "Your boss?" Walter snapped, stepping forward. "I've lived here 40 years. Built half this damn neighborhood. That land's mine, and I didn't approve this." The worker shrugged, turning away. "Orders say otherwise." Defeated for the moment, we retreated to the house, but Walter's resolve hardened. "We're going to the HOA," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Someone's got answers." The Cedar Hollow Community Center sat a block away, a low-slung building with peeling paint and a legacy tied to Walter's sweat and generosity. He'd helped fund its construction in the 80s, back when the neighborhood was just dirt roads and dreams. Now, it felt like enemy territory. We headed straight for Claudia Reynolds' office, the HOA president whose reign had turned neighbors into strangers. Her door was ajar, revealing a woman in her late 50s with jet black hair, dyed to perfection in a posture that screamed control. She sat behind her desk, typing furiously, her crimson nails clicking against the keys. Walter didn't knock. "Claudia," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "There's a crew tearing up my buffer zone. That's my land. What's going on?" She looked up slowly, her green eyes narrowing as if we were an inconvenience. "Walter," she said, her tone dripping with false warmth. "I assumed you'd heard. The HOA voted last month to expand the PA VY Lion. We needed the space, and that lot's now association property." "I wasn't in any vote," Walter shot back, leaning on his cane. "And I didn't sell that land. Show me the paperwork." Claudia's lips twitched into a smirk. She slid a manila folder across her desk, its contents pristine and official. Inside was a property map I didn't recognize, our buffer zone swallowed by new lines, and a document dated March 10th with Walter's signature authorizing the transfer. My heart sank. Walter's hand trembled as he studied it, his breath hitching. "This isn't my signature," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "I never signed this." Claudia leaned back, folding her arms. "The meeting was March 10th. You were there, Walter. Your name's on the minutes. The funding records everything. Maybe it's time to admit your memory's slipping." Her gaze flicked to me, sharp as a blade. Or maybe Nora should have been paying closer attention. I bristled. My father's sharper than you'll ever be. If he says he didn't sign it, he didn't. What game are you playing? She didn't flinch. No game. The Pa VY Lions MOVYing forward. The community needs it. Take it up with the board if you're so sure. We left her office in stunned silence, Walter clutching the forged document like it was poison. That night, a storm swept through Cedar Hollow, wind howling as rain battered the house. I woke to a gurgling sound that wasn't thunder water rushing into the basement. I raced downstairs, flipping on the light to find 4 inches of floodwater lapping at the walls. Cardboard boxes of Mom's old letters, Walter's military medals, decades of our lives all drowning. I dialed Claudia's personal number, my hand shaking. She answered on the first ring, her voice smug. Property damage isn't our concern, she said before I could explain. Call your insurance. Your construction caused this. I shouted. The digging get cracked, our foundation. Prove it, she replied, and hung up. Walter appeared on the stairs, his face pale in the dim light. Something's rotten, Nora, he murmured. My name's on their funding records, but I never approved this Pa VY Lion. I froze. Funding records? He looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. I've been propping up the HOA for years. Quietly. No one was supposed to know. Before I could process that bombshell, a thunderous crack shook the house. We stumbled outside into the rain to find our in-ground Poola haven of summer memories split down the middle, water gushing into the muddy yard. The ground beneath it had buckled, fractured by the relentless excavation. My phone buzzed with a text from the HOA. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Attendance mandatory. Dula 600 fine for absence. Walter stared at the wreckage, rain plastering his pajamas to his skin. They knew this would happen, he said, his voice barely audible. They wanted it to. The community center buzzed with tension the next morning. Neighbors we'd known for decades, people who'd shared our Christmas dinners, borrowed our lawnmower, avoided our gazes. Mrs. Delaney, whose grandson I babysat, turned her back when I waved. Claudia took the podium in a sleek gray blazer, her presence silencing the room. We're here to celebrate the new Cedar Hollow Pa VY Lion, she announced, clicking through slides of a glossy building with fitness rooms and a cafe. No mention of our flooded basement, our ruined pool, or Walter's stolen land. Walter raised his hand, but Claudia ignored him for 15 agonizing minutes before nodding curtly. Your construction's destroying my property, he said, standing despite the pain in his leg. And it's on land I never gave up. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Claudia's smile didn't falter. As I explained, Walter, the property lines were legally adjusted. Your signature's on the documents. She flashed a slide with the forged paperwork, bold and unapologetic. Any damage to your home is your responsibility. I didn't sign that, Walter said, his voice trembling with rage. You're lying, Claudia. She sighed dramatically. This is why we needed a unanimous votito protect the community from baseless accusations. Before he could respond, Walter clutched his chest and staggered. I caught him as he fell, screaming for help as the room dissolved into chaos. Claudia watched from the podium, her expression cold, as paramedics rushed in. At the hospital, the doctor's diagnosis hit like a freight train, stress-induced cardiac event. He needs complete rest. I bit back a bitter laugh. Rest was a fantasy now. When I got home that night, water seeped through the front yard, the driveway webbed with fresh cracks. Taped to the door was an HOA violation notice. Dulon 900 fine for unsightly property damage. Repairs due in 5 days. I crumpled it and stormed to the community center, fury blazing. Claudia's office glowed in the darkened building. Through the window, I saw her with a man in a tailored suit, her husband, Victor Reynolds, owner of Reynolds Construction, the company behind the Pa VY Lion. A voice startled me. They're meeting with investors tonight. I spun to find Paul Grayson, our neighbor for 15 years, lurking in the shadows. His face was etched with unease. What's happening, Paul? I demanded. Why's everyone against us? He glanced at Claudia's window. The HOA's broke, Nora. Been in the red for years. Claudia pitched this VY Lion as our lifeline higher dues, new residents. Your dad's land was the only spot that worked. So they stole it? I hissed. Paul shifted uncomfortably. She found out Walter's been the anonymous donor keeping us afloat. Figured he'd roll over for the greater good. He was in surgery that day, I said, realization dawning. They forged it while he was under. Paul wouldn't meet my eyes. Board voted while he was out. Claudia said he'd agreed. Back home, I found Walter's office trash drawers yanked open, papers scattered. The safe under his desk hung empty, except for a folder labeled HOA donations. Inside were records of decades of payment Smillian Sand recent documents with signatures that didn't match his older ones. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back room, community center, tomorrow, 1 p.m. Come alone if you want the truth. The next day, jackhammers woke me at 4:45 a.m., the noise of relentless assault. Walter sat at the kitchen table, his hands unsteady around his coffee. The Millers won't speak to me, he said softly. 25 years next door, and now I'm in VY Seibel. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Karen Holt, whose daughter I'd coached in soccer. Your sprinklers are flooding my driveway, she snapped. Fix it. Our sprinklers are broken, I said, incredulous. The construction cracked the pipes. Then do something about it, she retorted. And your yard's a mess. She stormed off as neighbors watched, silent and hostile. The mail brought 3 more violation notices. Due law $700 for property damage. Due law $500 for drainage. Due law $400 for neglect. Walter stared at them, his voice breaking. They're burying us. At 1 p.m., I slipped into the community center's back room, nerves jangling. A woman in a dark coat waited Lydia Brooks, a former board member who'd vanished last year. I've got EVY Denke, she whispered, handing me a flash drive. Recordings of Claudia forging votes, paying off inspectors. She threatened my kids when I pushed back. Why help us now? I asked wary. Because I'm tired of running, she said. Walter's a good man. This isn't right. That night, water poured through our ceiling, the latest casualty of the shifting ground. I called Lydia. They're crushing us, I said, voice cracking. What's on that drive? Enough to ruin her, she replied. Meet me tomorrow at the library. Bring Walter. Walter insisted on coming, despite his frailty. I won't hide, he said, gripping his cane. At the library, Lydia played the recordings Claudia's voice, icy and ruthless, admitting to the forgery, the kickbacks, the plan to seize Walter's land. We go public, Lydia said. Expose them. But fate intervened. A gas line ruptured near the construction site, spewing fumes across the street. By the time I got home, the house reeked and Walter's office files were soaked from a burst pipe. Claudia appeared with another violation notice due La 800 for hazardous conditions, her smirk infuriating. Rules are rules, Nora. I called Lydia, panicked. The documents are ruined. Not all of them, Walter said, his voice steady. There's a safe deposit box at Cedar Trust. Duplicates of everything. Keys in my nightstand. Relief surged. You're brilliant, Dad. Just prepared, he said, a faint smile breaking through. The VY Lion's grand opening was set for Friday. Claudia sent a mocking in VYT, naming Walter a valued contributor. We're going, he declared. They won't bury us. With Lydia's recordings and the bank documents, we built our case. The ceremony was a spectacle, streamers, a brass band, Claudia in her element. When she called Walter to speak, he took the stage, frail but fierce, and unleashed the truth. The forgery, the theft, the destruction. The crowd gasped as Lydia played the recordings, Claudia's voice damning her. She lunged for the mic, but crashed in, then the building shuddered. A crack split the floor, and screams erupted as the shoddy structure began to collapse. Outside, Claudia shrieked at Walter, "You've destroyed me," as police swarmed. He shook his head. "You did that yourself." Months later, Claudia and her cronies were arrested for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. Neighbors rallied to rebuild our home, guilt fueling their efforts. The land was restored to Walter, and we turned it into a public Gardeno HOA strings attached. As we sat on our repaired porch, watching kids play where the Pa VY lion once stood, Walter squeezed my hand. We didn't just save our house, Nora. We saved Cedar Hollow. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew he was right. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this VY Deo with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next VY Deo.